Brucella Jordan. I have just recently begun thinking of myself as a poet. I had written poetry over the years, but never shared it with anyone except Norman. I mostly wrote historical, nonfiction type literature, and that was like what people expected from me, I think. In our household, it was like Norman was the poet and I was the historian, and that's just the way it was. But when I retired from teaching, I decided to do something with the poems that I had written over the years. So I put them into a collection entitled Flashback Poetry and Commentary. It was a lot of fun doing this little book. Having the commentaries combine the historian in me with the poet in me. And Norman was my constant companion and critic throughout that whole process. It was ready to be published about a year before he passed away. And about 2 months before he passed, and he was beginning to realize that his time was short, he said, "I'm going to help you get that book published." But he didn't have the strength to do it. So I put it together probably about 3-4 months after he passed away. So now I'm working on another collection of poems, and I'm feeling a little bit more like a poet. And I'll read you a few of some of those that I'm kind of fond of. Most of what I'm going to read you are poems that include Norman or are about Norman. Okay, here it is. We were living in Jackson, Tennessee for a while. That was where I was working at Lane College, the school that I retired from. And while I was there, Norman joined a group of writers called the Griot Collective. And they became very fond of him, and they met regularly, and he interacted with them quite a bit. And when we were leaving there and coming back to West Virginia, they gave him a going away party, and they asked me to say some things, you know, in their little ceremonial type of program that they had set up. And so I wrote this poem, and to me the poem was like how I changed as a person after Norman and I got together. It's called What Drew Me to You, for my husband. Years ago, amidst an alcoholic ambiance, there shone a creative sensitivity that touched an invisible yearning within my soul. Like a magnet, I rose to meet the challenge as you fertilized the seed of inquiry, germinating heretofore in barren soil. And through you, a mundane world expanded and exploded into paths leading to celestial heights. Those precious revelations are acknowledged and embraced tonight as I ponder what drew me to you, my soulmate. So then the next poem that I wrote about him, I wrote after he passed away, about 3 months afterwards. I was having trouble sleeping at night. I remember one night I didn't go to sleep till 5 o'clock in the morning. And I don't really know what the reason for that was, but Around that time, I wrote this poem, and I just entitled it A Love Poem. June 27th, the day of your physical demise, your transition from this world to the next. How different life became for me. That date, the beginning of you being uppermost in my consciousness, 24/7, living and breathing you through and through. Then, in exactly 3 months, September 27th, you came in a dream, seemingly to ease the pain, reminding me of your goodness and the perfect team that we had made. I can sleep now as I embrace this new reality of you residing no longer in this house, no longer in my arms, no longer your lips or skin touching mine, no longer the meeting of our eyes, which caused my heart to skip a beat. I have you now wrapped gently in the memories of my mind, enclosed in the chambers of my heart, until our spirits dance when once again we meet. This poem isn't really about Norman, but he is included in it. There was, maybe about a year ago, I was thinking about identity in relationship to myself, and I actually wrote 2 or 3 poems related to that. This one is entitled Pondering One Aspect of Identity, subtitled After Africa and the Diaspora. What's it like to be an Appalachian writer? I was asked. A difficult question for me, since I do not feel like an Appalachian writer, just a writer. Unable to deny my North American upbringing on the Lake Erie shores of Cleveland, nor the place of my birth in Mississippi, although that speck of land does inhabit Appalachian territory. It is the culture of the Deep South to which I most relate. Ancestral heritage, too, factors into the equation, relatives past and present, them being from that same Southern cultural space, connecting it to them and to me. Take the family reunion in Macon, for example. It was my favorite. I loved being on the land, observing horses corralled and grazing, tall pine trees and red soil, all causing me to have an ephemeral perception of the hardships sharecroppers and tenant farmers endured as they struggled to possess their own land. Mom mentioned that when we recorded her oral testimony, and so familiar it all feels to me. It was different for Norman. There was no denying his Appalachian connection. Coming back to West Virginia from the Lake Erie shores and other lands near and far was a rekindling experience. Back to his roots, the place of his birth, his childhood, the memories that he loved, all having nurtured and molded him. Proud of that heritage he was. What's it like that makes one an Appalachian writer? Is it that you were born, raised, or reside in Appalachia? That you write about things relative to Appalachia, or both, like Nikki G? Am I an Appalachian writer, and what is it like? I'm still working on that answer. What I know is that I love West Virginia, the most Appalachian of all the states. Its cool, laid-back beauty, bold, serene, and pristine. There's nothing like the mountains. And although some may disagree, I admire the resilience and the industriousness of the people, When I'm there, it feels like home. When I'm away, it beckons me back, like it does so many Appalachians.
Oh, wow.
Okay, after Norman had been gone for a while, it became easier for me to think and write about him. So I'm just going to read a couple that I've written within the last year, I think, about him. Eccentricity was Norman Jordan's forte. How many people do you know who save their own nails? Not framing nails, finishing nails, or collated nails, but fingernails and toenails. I knew only one, poet and playwright Norman Jordan. A collector of things he was, all things, but really orderly with it. Not a hoarder in the familiar sense, but kind of. Lots of stuff, however, too organized and systematic for that title. Like, who saves fingernails and toenails? A quart-sized mason jar full of them. And what does one do with them once collected? Strangely enough, some people want to see them. If you are one of those people, look for that display in the namesake's historical exhibit entitled Eccentricity Was Norman Jordan's Forte. Unfamiliarity is now the norm. Always amongst the avant-garde, he came back east from Cali in 1975, sporting shoulder-length dreadlocks at a time when nobody knew what they were. Over the years, the locks grew like weeds, finally reaching down to his knees, and wherever he went, young and old alike asked two questions. Is that your hair? And can I touch it? I'll read one more. This isn't about Norman. It's just one that I kind of like, that I wrote recently. It's called Facing Reality. The NAACP's email message today is, don't be discouraged, addressing the actuality that in today's world there is much to be discouraged about. This time last year, I sat on a panel discussing poetry in turbulent times. I felt at that time that here in my space, the times were not so turbulent, but other people in other spaces could say more, but I was wrong about that. I can only feel that way if I separate myself from the world and all around me, and that's not possible. Maybe in one's thinking, but not in reality. I can only feel that way if I minimize what unfortunately has become today's norm, and I must not do that.